afternoon.
So I was thinking,
I think we're going to get started because we have a pretty full panel today. So we're going to jump right in. So we're really excited to be back here. My name is Stacy Matuza. I'm a Deputy Chief Program Officer at CUCS. And you may have been here last year, and we had a panel, myself and Lee, where we talked about the Buried in Treasure initiative that we were doing at CUCS, and we were just getting started last year. And we're really excited to come back today to do this panel to talk about the results of that. And we have a really great agenda. We have all these folks on our panel today. We have Lee and Beck Shuer, who are going to be talking about Buried in Treasure curriculum. We've got folks from CUCS who ran the 2 Buried in Treasure groups at our sites. We have our research and evaluation manager here to talk about the initial research results that we're seeing. And we're really excited to have Walter Berry here, who is a Times Square resident and a graduate of our BIT classes. So, first I'm going to turn it over to Lee and Beck, who are going to do an overview of Buried in Treasure. We're also going to talk about the cost benefits of doing an intervention like this as opposed to other interventions that we've used to help folks who have issues with hoarding. We're going to get an update from CUCS on how the groups went at the site. So some of the great progress that we've had, some of the challenges that we encountered, some ideas on how to tackle those challenges going forward. And then like I said, we're going to hear from somebody who went through the group and what that experience was like. So since we have such a full agenda, I'm going to just kick right off to Lee and Beck, who are going to start things off talking about Buried in Treasure.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Beck Shuer. Before we start getting into the curriculum and all the wonderful things that we've been able to implement in the supportive housing system, I want to orient you to what hoarding disorder is.
Right there, bottom right corner.
There we go. And there we go. What is hoarding disorder? Hoarding disorder was entered into the DSM in 2013. Prior to that, it had fallen into the OCD category. It doesn't really belong there. So it was just this change 4 years ago, and right now we're working hard to disseminate the information that this is a distinct diagnosis. In hoarding disorder, there is persistent difficulty discarding items regardless of value. Now that regardless of value is really important, because if we're trying to judge value of people's possessions, we often wind up judging the person too. So what we're trying to do here is look at the actual content. How much stuff do people have? It's more respectful and more practical to work from that kind of perception of the problem that we're talking about. This difficulty is due to a perceived need to save and the distress associated with discarding. Now, the key to hoarding disorder is the attachment piece. There is attachment, and it is an overwhelming and extreme attachment, and it's kind of got a wide scope. It's not like someone is attached to 1 or 2 items. They feel very attached to all of their belongings. So that is really a difference in the typical attachments that we all relate to. There's clutter in active living areas. One thing I want to point out is that when we're talking about supportive housing, all of the living space is really, all the space someone has is living space. There aren't basements and attics and storage facilities. So really we're looking at all of the available living space kind of gets consumed by the clutter. And there's significant distress and impairment. And when I talk about distress, I mean a clinical level of distress. The kind of distress that has people wanting to hold on to their possessions over letting their houses go. They're losing their homes because that distress, the idea of letting go of their belongings, is so extreme that even when they're threatened with the process of eviction, they still want to hold on to their possessions because they can't break free of that attachment piece. Now, there are 2 specifiers for hoarding disorder. They are not always there, but we do point it out. Excessive acquisition. That would be someone who is always going out and acquiring more and more. That can occur. Sometimes there's just a problem where people are keeping what they already have. So maybe they're not going out and acquiring. But one thing that's special in your New York City urban area is that there are so many opportunities for people to go out and acquire here that it's probably a bigger problem because things are everywhere. And all of the things that people see that they might be tempted to acquire really represent possibilities to them. And we'll talk a little bit about what I mean there in a moment. Another thing is poor insight is another qualifier. It may or may not be there when someone presents with hoarding disorder. And sometimes we don't really know how much insight a person has because there are instances where someone might present to a professional as not having insight, but we really have to say, is it a matter of them not wanting another diagnosis? Is that why they're saying, I don't feel that my clutter problem is an issue? So there are multiple reasons why someone could appear to have poor insight, but we don't really know. So these are the two qualifiers, the specifiers that may or may not be present. Now this is the model that represents how the clutter problem actually comes to be. So what I want to show you here is people have certain vulnerabilities, susceptibilities to the things that lead to clutter, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. There are emotional attachments and beliefs that get in the way of people dealing with clutter effectively. There are 6 main emotional unhelpful attachments and beliefs, and those are, usefulness, waste, and responsibility. So this comes into play the person who is kind of an environmentalist. They want to prevent things from winding up in the landfill. Now, this is not a bad trait, but in some instances it becomes overwhelming and excessive, that desire to be the recycler. Another unhelpful belief that can present is overly creative thinking. Now, we come to think of creativity as wonderful, but sometimes it can really present a sticking problem for people if they're thinking of too many uses for everyday items. They're maybe thinking of all the different ways they can use something, and then it's harder to let things go. Also, perfectionism is another unhelpful belief that we find coming into hoarding disorder. And I know that people often don't see how perfectionism could fit in with this disorder because it looks like clutter. No one thinks it looks like a perfect home when they're shown pictures. The reason perfectionism comes up is because some people are unwilling to discard things if they can't go about it in exactly the right way, the way they feel is perfect. And that's when it gets stuck. So an example that you might see here is someone who starts out with the intention of collecting cans to recycle to make some income. But then when hoarding disorder gets in the way, their perfectionism could be telling them, well, I'm not going to bring those to the recycle center until I have exactly this number, or until I have this certain bag filled. There are many, many underlying reasons that kind of compound these things. Another reason is identity. That's another sticking point of why people don't discard things. They're really attached. And again, I just want to repeat, it's an excessive attachment, a really extreme attachment, a visceral attachment that people here have. And when we talk about identity, that's kind of a case of, I am what I have. Well, if I let go of those things, who am I anymore? Sentimentality is the really common one that everyone I talk to can relate to. But here we can see it in things like something like a bag of goldfish crackers, for example. You can walk into someone's home and think that's trash. Well, there could be a sentimental reason they're holding on to that bag, because for some people that could represent childhood. And I hear that kind of thinking time and time again. So these are all the things that complicate issues where people are being asked or expected to discard, but they're having difficulty with it. There's also another one that comes up, which is safety, security, and control. And that one has to do with maybe someone's been burgled in the past. Maybe they feel like in their bedroom, if they keep clutter around them, then they will feel safer. Now, we can say there are other ways of finding safety, but it can take a while to get there. And so these are kind of coping skills that people have used. Information processing combines with the way we think and feel, those unhelpful beliefs. And the information processing has to do with attention and focus. So if someone has ADD or they're very distractible, that's going to get in the way of organizing and decluttering. Also, some people have real hard times with categorization. We take for granted that people get it and have things orderly, but some people's mental faculties don't really assimilate categorization skills very well. So that's another skill we work on with people. Then there's decision making. We take for granted so many decisions we make in a day, but they can really get bogged down when it comes to looking at their possessions. And then the last one is about memory, and that is either a true memory deficit, but more likely research has shown that we think we're going to have trouble with memory. And so therefore we keep everything and we want to see it because we think we'll forget about it. So the thinking and the information processing combine. Now the vulnerabilities come in when you have people maybe who have been using these kind of coping skills in the past, and now they're in supportive housing. So the things that help them survive outside, maybe if they were living on the street, like the gathering of things that'll help them, like I might not have resources again, so I need to hold on to it. Those are patterns, behavior patterns that have built up for good reasons, for survival and wellness as far as someone could handle it. And so now we see that they're entering supportive housing, and how do we counter this, these behavior patterns that have been reinforced? And these behavior patterns are seeking and acquiring to feel good, because often in hoarding disorder, people do get a good sensation when they find a great thing. And also they're trying to avoid the feelings of bad feelings that go with discarding. There's a lot of emotional upheaval when people go to discard things. And that leads to those behavior patterns where you're either acquiring or you're not letting go. And that adds up to clutter in the end. And now, Lee is going to pass it along to you and talk about the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you, Beck. It's awesome to be back to present on Buried in Treasures again. A few years ago, we were talking about a pilot study at Columbia University. Last year, we were here to talk with CUCS about launching this program, and it's really wonderful to be here to actually get to talk about how it went. But what is Buried in Treasures? For those of you who don't know, and for those of you who don't know me yet, this is a personal experience. This is not just something I do as a job. It's something that I live, being in recovery myself from what I consider excessive finding keeping, also known as hoarding disorder. But it's been a real, honor to be able to develop this workshop with Dr. Randy Frost and hundreds of my peers who have given input over the years to help us make up a plan that really works. So what is the Buried in Treasures workshop? So BIT is an action-oriented peer support group for people who want to reduce their acquiring and saving. Now that feeds into what Beck was talking about with Insight. These are folks that want to do it, but it's still hard even when you want it. BIT is a harm reduction approach to making and maintaining a healthy, safe living space. So unlike what you see in the TV shows, it's not all or nothing, get rid of everything. It's about health and safety. Can I get through the rooms? Can I get out if I need to? And BIT groups use positive, strengths-based language to foster a sense of community, reduce shame, and bust stigma. Now, we know that there's a lot of stigma around this challenge. The way people with hoarding disorder are portrayed in the media is often negative. Beck and myself have been portrayed in the media as having more problems than solutions in our relationship, and that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. So it's really hard to actually come out and put yourself in the spotlight to say, yeah, I'm dealing with this, but to be able to say, I'm going to take this opportunity to say, you're meeting someone who's worked through it. So what are the goals of the program? So we're helping participants understand why they save things, teach them how to create and maintain the living space they can use, help improve decision-making skills. So like Beck was saying, some of these, we call them the bad guys. These are the things that are making it hard to make progress even when you're trying. But BIT addresses these specific challenges step by step, assuming that people haven't learned these things yet or that they really need to reinforce that knowledge. Encourage them to reduce acquiring and enjoy other activities. There is a lot to do in the city. But I could imagine on my way to do some of those things, I might see a lot of things I want to bring home, and I could easily be sidetracked. So we actually spend a lot of time talking about reducing the acquiring and actually enjoying other activities. Because it's never about the stuff, it's really about what it represents. And if the treasure hunt gives you the thrill, but then the emotional crash because you're bringing it home and seeing it, the question is, what else can I do to have that good feeling? Ultimately, we want to reduce clutter, and we want to increase the quality of life. So what changes were made to the BIT curriculum to better suit supportive housing implementation? So this was developed in a more suburban community, but when you're moving a curriculum into an urban community where housing is smaller, where there are different challenges, you really need to adapt, and the curriculum is flexible to reflect that. So before we even got started, we talked about what these changes might look like. So what was put forward to us was that the duration of the workshop, which is usually 20 weeks in the past, maybe it could be 16 weeks for this trial. And so that was something that we planned to do ahead of time. We took out several weeks of break time to maintain the continuity. Now, you may or may not know this, but in the most current version of BIT, we have officially taken those breaks out because we agree that when you're getting going, why take a break? We had wanted people to try it on their own in between, but decided, maybe we want to keep the ball rolling. And the duration of the workshop sessions was reduced from 2 hours each to 1 hour each. So that's something that CUCS will be talking about later on in terms of their recommendations for next steps moving forward with those changes. But again, it's really about cultural competency. If this works in one community one way, it doesn't mean it's going to be a perfect fit when you move it to another place. So there needs to be communication. You got to know who you are, who you're working with, and what it's going to take to move forward. So oftentimes when we're looking at introducing a new intervention, people will say, show me the money. I want to know, is it going to save us money? Recovery? Yeah, nice. What about the money? Okay, so let's go there. So what are the associated expenses of a full clean out, as seen on TV? So a single clean out costs $10,000 or more, and they're often repeated. Now, some of the services that are, related to this and why it's so expensive, there's the recovering of valuables. Trash removal from premises might include hazmat, biohazard, pharmacological items. Cleaning of the home and or contents. Most companies leave the property broom swept. So you can see there's still a lot of work to do, even if this was done. Coordination of maintenance. So there might be plumbing, extermination, electrical, painting, construction work that needs to be done. Imagine breaking the cycle so that this wasn't your to-do list. Finally, consulting with family, social services, mental health workers, and the municipality. There's a lot that goes into this intervention when it's done this way. And just to imagine that that's just part of a cycle of doing it again and again. So the associated expenses of a fire in an apartment building, a recent apartment fire in Massachusetts cost an estimated $700,000. And fortunately, in this case, nobody died. But still, there was damage to the apartment building, so there was water, smoke, and structural damage. There were displaced tenants. Some folks couldn't move back in for a year, so they needed to be housed. The loss of income for the property owner. The disruption to the lives of the neighbors. Let's remember this is often a community tragedy. And the destruction of neighbors' personal property. So you can imagine why people are so upset when this happens. Because oftentimes people will say, it's my right, I can live how I want. That's true to a point. But at a certain point, it might actually start to put your neighbors in harm's way. And that's especially frequent when you live in such close proximity to each other. So what are the associated expenses of a Buried in Treasures workshop? A copy of the Buried in Treasures book costs $16. The Facilitator Guide is free to download. Agencies, municipalities, and religious institutions often offer a free room. Facilitators may charge a fee. Some volunteer, or others, like the folks up here, may facilitate as a part of their job. So the benefits of BIT include greater success in maintaining tenancy, a sense of pride and belonging, stronger, more stable personal relationships, financial stability, a brighter outlook on life, reduced medical expenses, and less intrusion by housing-related personnel. I think one of the greatest myths about people in supportive housing, and this is something that we've seen time and time again, is that you people are here to get us people evicted. That's your job. No, I think we'd all agree that our job is to help people maintain safe housing, right? So that's why we're all here today, is to learn more about this intervention, how it works, why it works, and then to hear more specifics about that process. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to CUCS. Thank you. Recovery's real. And you'll have lots of time for questions at the end.
Okay, so now we're going to kind of get into the specifics of how we rolled this out at our sites. So you're going to be hearing shortly from Christine Boehler and Joey Drucker, who are two of the group leaders at the BIT groups that ran at the Times Square and the Prince George. You'll also be hearing from Ada Welch, who's in the process of doing our evaluation of the program. And again, we're going to hear from Walter Barry, who is a graduate. So this is kind of a general timeline, and we'll get into more specifics on each of these as folks come up and speak. But this was a really thoughtful process. We had a lot of work group meetings, a lot of meetings. It started in February of last year, where we formed our group. We kicked it off in May with a 3-day training with Lee and Beck and Dr. Randy Frost, and that was a really intensive training on the curriculum, where we got a lot of group work, practice. We got to go through some of the activities that take place in a BIT group to kind of put ourselves in that position and what that feels like. So that was really helpful and kind of kicked off our initiative. In mid-July, we began marketing at both the Prince George and the Times Square, and Christine and Joey are going to talk a little bit more about the marketing and show you some examples of flyers we used. In July, Lee came and had info sessions for tenants at the Times Square and the Prince George with some really great attendance. And then through the month of August, we started recruiting folks who had been at that info session, other folks that maybe didn't go to the info session, but we thought the group would be really beneficial for. We recruited them to join BIT and also invited them to participate in the study that we would be doing. And then the groups ran from August through December. And in December, we did our first round of assessments, and you'll be hearing the results of that today, which is really exciting. And we have round 2 coming this month, and then round 3 will be a final group of assessments that will happen in December of this coming year. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Christine and Joey.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. So Stacy sort of talked a little bit about our long process of planning for this, and there was a major focus on recruitment and outreach. Anyone that's run a group in a supportive housing setting, especially a psychoeducational group or a process group, knows that it takes a lot to get people to come. You have a handful of people maybe that will just want to kind of join every group, but for the most part, you're really, really making a big effort to get people to come. And so we had a lot of one-on-one conversations with tenants months in advance, a lot of conversations with the staff. We had flyers posted, which I'll show you in a minute. And then we had the info session with Lee, which was awesome and very well attended, but even as well attended as the info session was, we probably only had about 50% of those people that came to the info session actually come for the group. You guys know this is for different reasons. It takes a lot.
Just to mention, we targeted people who either have had heavy-duty deep cleanings, people who are slotted to have them. So, Lee and Beck mentioned the excessive acquisition. We see a lot of that coming in the building. So it's pretty easy to get a sense of who might fit. Another thing of who showed up, though.
Well, right, and so our intention, we had these great intentions of, all the people that are in the legal process with the building, and all the people that are, having these different types of problems or having tons of stuff in their apartment, or the people that we can't reach that won't talk to us, they're going to join the group. It's going to be great. Obviously, that wasn't our experience at first, right? And which is, probably a little bit foolish on our part, knowing our population. But ultimately, we did have people that definitely fit criteria and definitely were in a place to improve their apartment or, start to address some of these issues that they've been having, but they were not our, people that were in the legal process necessarily. And then we had actually a handful of tenants at the Times Square that did not struggle with hoarding or acquiring or anything of the sort and wanted to join the group. We gave them some more appropriate referrals because I think that they were looking for some support, some companionship, and we gave them some referrals. This is our flyer. So something that's probably worth mentioning, we didn't actually advertise for the group itself. We only advertised for the info session. The reason we did that is because we didn't want to start the group. We wanted people that were appropriate for this group to be in the group, given the content, given that we wanted the group members to support each other and really have a common sort of feelings around these topics and to really develop some cohesion. We didn't want people that didn't fit that criteria to be in the group and then sort of throw off the vibe. So we advertised the info session, and from the info session, knowing our tenants, we kind of put the group together. So that's what this was.
And then with it being a 15-session group, after, I think it was the third group, we made it a closed group, so no one new could join at that time, because the curriculum's very rich, a lot of information, and it builds on itself. So we didn't want to interrupt the cohesion that was happening.
And it again, it takes a few groups to really get going. I think in general when you're running groups, but especially in our setting, you have people maybe that come to the first one, they won't come back till the fourth one. They'll pop in and out depending on how ready they are. And so that those are the same things we were up against. But by closing it, sort of help people just sort of focus, and then they could really feel comfortable with each other in the group. So the response to the marketing and the recruitment at both sites was really positive. There was a definite interest after the info session with Lee. And like I said, half of those people ended up joining the group at each site. So at the Times Square, which is a bigger program, 8 participants completed the class, and at the Prince George, we had 6.
And I'll just add, we did not offer any refreshments,
Yeah.
which we usually do for every group to get people to come. But this curriculum is so just necessary for people who wanted it that they came without it.
Yeah, no bribery, no anything of the sort. And it's really important to note because people kept coming, even though there was no incentive other than what they wanted to get out of the group and to be with people that were their peers. So like I said, they liked the group, they wanted to keep coming, and Ada will talk a little bit about the positive outcomes on the assessment pre-post group. So the first set of data collection showed improvements, which is really exciting.
All right, so as Lee mentioned, the original course was for suburban areas. So people had cars, they had basements, they had more room, more stuff, but it needed to be shifted a little bit. And going through the book, it did present some difficulties people felt. One member had a large apartment in Brooklyn, and when he moved to the Times Square, I think he had like a 3-bedroom apartment, and he tried to bring as much as he could, so of course it was cluttered instantly. So not just a loss of stuff, but a loss of identity through having a bigger home. Our tenants have a really complex history. Most of them have street homelessness, there's severe mental illness, poverty, things that make having lots of stuff safe, a way to plan for the future, and a strong relationship to those things, more so maybe than someone who's been in the same home for a long time.
Yeah, just to dive into that a little bit more. I mean, I think just talking about with our population, the culture of poverty is very different from the general population. And so the idea to a lot of our tenants who have either been on the street or just have been so poor for so long, the idea of getting rid of stuff that has a value, monetary or not, is kind of makes no sense to them, you know, and this is really, really embedded, and it's, you know, the value of a can is not, you know, what we would hold as the value of a can. So that, to ask them to get rid of it is asking a lot.
Another challenge was the book talks about having a staging area for when you finally get to the decluttering work, and that just doesn't exist for our tenants. Even, you know, 1 or 2 square feet, it's just not reasonable to have that clear empty space. We haven't really figured out how to work through that yet, but it's out there. And then reading and homework challenges. So Lee warned us and Dr. Frost from the get-go, like the people who do the reading and the homework are the ones who show the most recovery. And with the people we work with, some people don't know how to read, some people don't want to read, some people forget that they're supposed to read. So a lot of the group sessions were us kind of lecturing about what the content of the book was.
Nobody did the homework at the Prince George group.
We had a couple.
Not one person. So no one did the reading, no one did the exercises. So we did a lot of it in class.
And the content was really rich and, you know, very emotionally provocative. So, you know, we saw that playing out and people, you know, coming to terms with this being a disorder, with this being a diagnosis for them. And in some ways, people felt that was very validating, that what I'm feeling, you know, kind of like it's not my fault, but it's also like, you know, I'm not alone in this. But in reading that, especially if you're reading it alone, it can be really overwhelming.
We had one person in our group talk about reading the diagnostic criteria made them feel better because they didn't feel like they were just being called dirty or like living in a dump, that this was like very empowering because it's like they had an actual set of criteria that sort of put them in a category, and that felt good, that felt validating, like Joey was saying.
And then group dynamics, supportive housing, we have many different people, many different levels of education, different levels of health. The groups were diverse, to say the least. Some people in the group that I facilitated did all the reading, and had a lot of insight into what was going on. Some people were there because we literally called them over and over again, and they knew they were bothered, that the landlord bugged them a lot about their apartments, so they were willing to come, but they weren't really eager for what we had to say.
And, you know, dynamics can be challenging in every group. I think Joey's group was, they actually were pretty cohesive pretty early on. Our group struggled a little bit. We had some location issues. We didn't have an ideal setting for running the group. We actually had to run it in an art room because a lot of the participants in the group actually had bed bugs. And so we didn't want to, of course, disqualify them because this is something that comes up, but we had to have a space, you know, with no fabric and different things like that. So it wasn't an awesome group. We got there, the group ended up doing well, but it took a little bit of time for everyone to sort of gel together. This is one of our units. This is actually one at the Prince George, so just so you guys have an idea of size, there's not much more to the unit than that. And so kind of this is what our tenants are working with.
So sometimes just an issue that looks to me like clutter, it's just such a small space to have to squeeze all those things in there. It can be really, really challenging. So we decided to shorten the groups. 2 hours felt way too long. The Times Square typically did 90-minute groups. I remember one participant said, like, are we done yet? Like, she was running out the door. And it was an especially emotional topic for that day. So, and you guys, 60 minutes.
We were closer to 60 minutes. We have a phenomenon at the Prince George called Prince George time, where nobody comes to things like kind of close to on time. We told one group, the group started, I think it was at 2 o'clock. We told her it started at 1:30. She came at 2:15. So that was how we got people to the group. So we were like intending to start the group at a better time to have the 90 minutes, but by the time we had any people, we only had an hour.
And I would just hound people to come to avoid that. I don't know if that was effective or not. So Lee mentioned we eliminated breaks. We were definitely worried about losing momentum, losing attendance completely. Did your group or my group, I forgot, requested to get rid of the breaks?
Yeah, one of the members in our group, we actually posed it to the group early on. You know, like the curriculum calls for a break. What do you guys think? And one person was like, if I break, I'm not coming back. And so we were like, okay, then we're having the group next week. So that was sort of some of the feedback we got from the participants.
We did offer a lot of external assistance, none of which was accepted. So we had a designated person who could help with just reading. So if someone, like we didn't want to disqualify someone who couldn't read. We even tried to connect, one-on-one, and the people didn't show up. Everyone at our buildings has a designated case manager. They offered support. It wasn't really utilized. And this needs more help than, 60 or 90 minutes a week.
And so, I mean, part of there's some different exercises in the group about having people come to your apartment, look at your stuff and things of that nature. I mean, we know that some of our tenants tend to be isolated. Maybe they didn't have a friend or a family member that they felt comfortable doing that with. We tried to volunteer to do that, or even a case manager. We didn't have any success. No one did those experiments in our group. I don't think in your group either. And no one really let us into their apartment to see what was going on.
And it showed us that the people who came to our groups needed more time to digest this. I will say Walter became like everyone's clutter buddy. Like everyone asked Walter to come see their apartment. I offered, people said no. I did share in the group, and I'll share here, I'm on the spectrum of this disorder. I would invite people into my office and show them all my clutter. It didn't get in the way of my functioning in life, but I definitely related to the strong feelings of perfectionism, wanting to dispose of things the correct way. So it backfired a little bit, because I would invite some people in and they're like, oh, that's nothing. You should see my apartment. And then I said, can I? And they said no.
Sure. So some ideas we have for future implementation. So like we said, this is a lot of material to cram into 90 or 60 minutes in our case. And so some ideas that we had about this was to actually run this group with an MSW intern and to spread out the sessions a little bit more. So some of the weeks have a little bit more material than other weeks. And so maybe not every single session, but some of them. And to do it with an intern, so that intern can almost have a project related to following up with the people in the group, making sure that they feel comfortable with what's going on, doing some of the homework with them, being the clutter buddy, doing these different things. Because an MSW intern has a lot more time than we did just doing this group. We really didn't have a ton more time to give than what we were already giving.
Yeah, it's different to offer assistance versus offering someone's coming to your apartment midweek, or you have to come to their office as part of joining the group.
Yeah, and we thought that, the week in between is okay. I mean, we had the people coming back, but to have someone dedicated to checking in the middle of the week, I think would be really, really helpful. We always had that option out there, and we always intended to do it, but I mean, it just wasn't always feasible. Like I said, keep classes short, but extend over a longer time period. So so we had the groups, and there was a lot of material, and so we probably could have spread the sessions out over more groups. But also, by the time we finished, everyone had moved from like a pre-contemplation stage to a contemplation stage. So they weren't necessarily ready to start going through their things, but they were ready to do something. And so we actually think that what might make the most sense is to run the group and then to run it immediately again. Because there's a lot of material, there's a lot of emotional content, and I think the people in the group sort of expressed that they were ready to like start doing something, but now there was no more support for them. So we would suggest doing it like that.
It's funny to me that when we were having our work groups, we thought 15 weeks was an eternity. And now both of us are saying we should make it longer and do it twice in a row. I think it speaks to how much the material spoke to our clients and how much I saw them getting out of it. But again, we were wrapping it up, and so one of the chapters, or two of the chapters, I think, talks about good guys and bad guys. Bad guys being things that get in the way or add to our clutter, and good guys, tools we can use to get over them. So, in terminating and ending a group, those things started coming out from people who weren't willing to talk about them at the beginning. And BIT talks about a finders keepers group. Is that the right language? Thank you. For peers to start a kind of maintenance group, like once a week, once a month. The Times Square tried that every other week, just to support whatever work had started, but our tenants were not there at all. So really starting over.
The PG said that they wanted to do it. We tried to get it started. No one responded. So I think they were over it at that point for a little bit. So we couldn't get that going.
And the last thing we thought, an audio version of the book would be nice. For people who cannot read, for people who don't want to read, and also that category. I've read books that are so dense that I keep reading the same sentence over, and if it's on an audio book, it just comes to me, and I can't stop it, and I'll absorb what I can, and the rest I'll maybe catch the next time. So I don't know if you have plans for that.
Yes, with sound effects.
Are you doing the recording? Okay, and then we're going to turn it over to Ada to talk about the evaluation.
Hi, I'm Ada. I'm the Research and Evaluation Manager for CUCS. And I think it's really interesting hearing Christine and Joey. I've heard them talk about this a number of times in various meetings. We like to have meetings at CUCS. But every time I'm just really struck by the fact that there were a lot of challenges, a lot of sort of real life stuff, and I love that you're keeping it so real and talking about what really happened in the groups. And at the same time, at both sites, not only did folks want to keep coming at the end of the group, and we're sort of at that point where they were ready to start really thinking about things and felt really moved by the material. But in the formal study that we did, we did a series of 4 assessments prior to the group and then after the group, and we saw positive changes on all 4 of those assessments, 2 of which showed statistical significance. So that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit about right now. So as part of this pilot, we did a formal research study. And what that means is that we created a research study proposal. We submitted it to the Institutional Review Board, and that's the body that oversees ethics in human subjects research. And participants did not have to agree to be in the study to participate in BIT because we didn't want it to be a barrier to folks. We knew some people would not be interested in having us share their information or share their outcomes outside of CUCS, and so we made it optional. And we did have, out of the 14 total workshop graduates across the 2 sites, 11 tenants were agreed to be in the study, and those are the folks for whom I'll be sharing most of the data for right now. As Joey and Christine mentioned, the BIT groups were for the most part open. There was no formal diagnostic criteria, and that's true for the study as well. And the study mostly consisted of 4 assessments. All 4 were questionnaires, self-report questionnaires that were completed by each participant. And they were completed before the classes began, before the BIT classes began, and then the week of the final week of the classes. And participants received $10 for each round of assessments completed for their time and their contribution to the study. And in general, it took about 45 minutes or less for each person to complete the whole series of 4 assessments. So not a huge time commitment for anyone. Let's see. How do I? Oh. Okay. So I'm just going to go over this quickly because we've already sort of covered it, but there were 2 groups. Each group had 2 facilitators. Both groups ran from August to December. And week 1 at Times Square, we had 11 attendees, and at the Prince George, 8 attendees. And then pretty much the attrition that happened really quickly as people realized, this wasn't exactly what I was expecting, or I'm not ready for this yet. So within the first couple of weeks is when we saw about that 25% attrition. We had, at Times Square, we had 8 people complete the group. And at the Prince George, we had 6 people complete the group. And of those, as I said, 7 from the Times Square were in the formal study, and 4 from the Prince George. So attendance, this is a cognitive behavioral based therapy based on those principles and tenets. And so if you're familiar with CBT, you know that dosage is important. It's important to be exposed to the material as much as possible to get the most out of it. So attendance is important. We had pretty good attendance overall, about 70%. Times Square, the average attendance was 11 of the classes, and there's 15 classes, right? 15. And at Prince George, there's 10 was the average attendance. And so I'm just going to cover the statistics for overall. Somehow Prince George got left off this slide. I don't know, but overall, the average age, I think, is actually quite similar to what we see at these sites, congregate housing sites in general. For Prince George and Times Square, was, average age was about 62, and our age range in the group was 38 to 77. About 3/4 of participants were male, and about 3/4 identified as Caucasian, non-Hispanic. And I think with educational attainment, it's interesting because in the research I've seen on hoarding disorder, folks tend to often have a higher educational attainment that receive this diagnosis, and that actually seems to be true with our group as well compared to the general residents at Times Square and Prince George. A little less than half of the attendees had a bachelor's degree or higher. Okay. In terms of mental health diagnosis, physical health diagnosis, and homelessness history, attendees of the BIT groups were very similar to folks in general at these sites. About 45% of attendees had a diagnosis of either schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. And these numbers don't add up to more than 100% because many folks had more than one diagnosis. So the next highest level or most common diagnosis was a depressive disorder. About 36% of all participants had a diagnosis of depression. And in general, 63% had some other mental health diagnosis. About 20% had no physical health diagnosis whatsoever, but 82% had some physical health diagnosis, the most common being a back injury, diabetes, or high blood pressure. And most folks had a history of homelessness, either chronic or episodic homelessness. The years housed is important because if you're thinking about changes made to thinking about your relationship to your things, you probably go through a lot of changes when you first come into supportive housing, right, in terms of your relationship to your items and your belongings. The average time housed in supportive housing for BIT graduates was 14.2 years. So folks had been in housing for quite a while. There was one person who was in housing for less than 1 year who was in the group. So for the study, we wanted to have a consistent way to measure and see where folks were at baseline, and then maybe how the group impacted or affected where they were at, after the 15 classes. So we used 4 different scales or assessments. All of these were validated and reliable instruments, meaning that they've been tested by researchers, primarily Dr. Randy Frost and his colleagues, he's the primary developer of the BIT curriculum, and along with Lee developed the facilitator's guide. The first I just posted like examples of questions. I can't put the whole assessment, you wouldn't be able to see it. But the first assessment that we did was the Hoarding rating scale. The Hoarding rating scale is a 5-item scale that's intended to reflect the proposed dimensions of a hoarding diagnosis. So difficulty using living space, difficulty discarding, excessive acquisition, emotional distress, and functional impairment. And this is just an example of one of the questions. To what extent do you have difficulty discarding or recycling, selling, or giving away ordinary things that other people would get rid of? The second scale that I'm going to talk about is the Savings Cognition Inventory. This is a really interesting inventory. It's 24 items, and it assesses the presence and strength of beliefs and feelings about possessions that might be triggered in attempts to discard. So it asks you to think about, if you're thinking about getting rid of something, how often does a thought or a feeling like this one come up for you? And it actually measures 4 different types of thoughts and feelings that might come up: emotional attachment, control, responsibility, and memory. So it's really, it allows you to really get a sense for each participant, what kind of things are motivating them to have difficulty discarding, or what things are preventing them from being able to discard. So here's just an example of 2 questions that are on that scale. Number 16 says, throwing some things away would feel like part of me is dying. And if you chose 1, that would be like, I never feel like that about anything. And 7 would be, I feel like that about almost everything I own. So all of us have probably something that we feel that way about, right? If it's like whether it's a childhood photo or just something that means a lot to us, a wedding ring or who knows what. But some folks really struggle with this in terms of almost everything. And then on a completely different type of, motivation, or a different type of struggle is, if I put this into a filing system, I'll forget about it completely. So some people feel like they need to have everything out in front of them to have in their memory, or they're going to forget about it. And we all have that thing that we put on the refrigerator, right? That like we want to remember something about this thing that's happening in a month. So this is a scale that measures a lot of different things, but it really allows you to get sort of a fingerprint for each person. This is a visual scale, the Clutter Image Rating Scale, and it's a series of 9 photos. It actually shows 3 different rooms, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a living area. And then participants are asked to pick from 1 to 9, sort of the amount of things in their apartment. And for this one, you emphasize, we know your apartment doesn't look like this, and your things may be very organized and orderly as compared to these photos, but just the amount. Okay, and then the last one is activities of daily living, which probably most of us in supportive housing are familiar with this concept. But this one is specifically for hoarding, and so when we talk about, when we give this assessment to folks to fill out, we say, just think about these things in terms of clutter. Is clutter getting in the way of each of these activities? And then they rate it from 1 to 5. 1 can do it easily, to 5, unable to do it. So those are the 4 scales that we administered. And these are the results. So in the first column is the assessment tool. In the middle column is the scores for the pre-group assessments, so before anyone had taken any classes. And then there's the post-group assessments. And what we found was that for the activities of daily living subscale, there was a statistically significant change. And for the Savings Cognitions Inventory, there was a statistically significant change, and also like a clinically significant drop. So you can see people had a really high rating on this Savings Cognitions Inventory score to begin with, and it dropped 20 some odd points. And I think that's really exciting because, as Christine and Joey mentioned, people were really starting to get to that contemplative phase at the end of the group, and this really shows, this whole process is intended to shift your thinking and your feeling around your belongings. And so this really, to me, demonstrates that this material really reached folks, that they responded to it, that it engaged them, and that they shifted in their thinking. And one thing I'd like to point out is that for both the clutter image rating and the ADL subscale, even though the ADL subscale was significant statistically, the ratings were kind of low. And I'm not really sure why. I don't know it would be something I would want to look into a little bit more, and maybe I would like to supplement some of these with some other, if I was doing additional evaluation, I would like to supplement these with some other tools to get a better picture of what people were dealing with. Because all of these are self-report, and I didn't really have like a qualitative interview with anyone. So I don't, you kind of have to take things with a grain of salt. I was really happy that we saw that these positive improvements, and that we saw the significance here. But I think there's always room for doing more evaluation and really getting a better sense of how is this working for everyone. And that's really all I have. I'm going to turn it over now to Walter, who's a BIT graduate. And yeah, that's all I have.
Hello. I'm very disappointed. Joey told me there was going to be open bar and there was going to be a lot better swag. But anyway, Times Square did a lot better than Prince George, but I like Prince George time. It was very tumultuous starting off. First, it was in a much smaller room. There were complaints right off the bat. But luckily, Joey came to me and told me about it, and it was something that I really needed. Joey, being as humble as he is, he said, Walter, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. But still, that just stuck with me. And because there were complaints of how 10 years ago there was a lot better food and all of these things. Years ago, what are they, groupies, that people go to different groups just to get, donuts or whatever. But I was really serious about this. I never thought I'd be in this situation. And being born in New York, I think, just being a New Yorker, I'm used to small spaces. I have friends who live in Japan, and there's places in our building that make their love hotels look big. There are some rooms that are just, for the need, it's just basic toiletries and coats create clutter. So this was very, very, just important for me just to get a hold of. And I don't know, I just kind of identified OCD, poster boy for it. What else was the identifying of that's mine, for me, my diverse interests, if that's removed or I get rid of that, who will I become? And we have some very, very creative people in our building. And I was just really humbled by them, people that put stage productions on, and how few chances I'm assuming that they get that in their life. And they were willing to get rid of that box because they couldn't fit a TV. But I was thinking, wow, what goes into a stage production? And they were willing to give that up. It was very humbling to me. Moving on, so in the beginning it was, like I said, it was very crazy, and then we made some ground rules of not using the word hoarding because of the negative connotations, but clutter, we all agreed upon that. And yeah, I don't know, I'm just remembering there was some really interesting, and then some people who were just literally came there and they just slept, and they just would say, I've been here 20 years and I'm just tired. But anyway, I'm just grateful to be living in Manhattan and just finding a solution to this issue. The problems that was mentioned prior, the homework, the staging, Ada's so patient. Going through those pictures, I would have trouble between, 7 and 8 looks so close, but I've been, unfortunately, in really bad housing, and for Times Square's part, I mean, you'll find certain people will complain about anything. We have in our building a new elevator coming in, and this elevator talks to you, it has lights, it's got padding. It's like a disco elevator. I mean, what more do you want? You know, it talks to you. And it's got padding, so some people can't hurt themselves, and there's lights, and they could dance if they want. People still complain about it's not being done fast enough. So, but getting back to this, when we were, so about halfway through the book, the homework projects, again, like the staging, like it really had nothing to do. Most of us were just concerned with trying to understand these young kids today don't even, I thought Blu-ray or HD TV was cutting edge. No, it's like even having that, you're considered old. Everyone downloads things for free and whatever, but that stuff takes up room. What did we do when we had records, or stereos? So just basic living that's what really is like hitting me now moving forward. It's been a very chilly spring, so I have most of my winter clothes away, but it was cold last week, a few days ago. So it's like I have still some clutter, shoes, like this area of, and I understand the safety of that, of needing the door to open, but I don't. Just anyone walking around a few blocks to getting here from this however you got here through subway or any transportation, I don't think you want to walk in those same shoes across your living space. I guess that tells me I have other issues too. But anyway, but just finding that so the door could open, and then you'll see an infomercial and this little, just buy this one thing and 3 easy payments, and you'll get rid of everything, which will only eventually you'll see break and create more clutter. So I don't know. Moving forward, I would think it would be nice if we had just basic storage, just as a suggestion, because I'm not going to need hopefully, a down jacket till 6 months from now. So, I mean, that is something that I could have something else. So, I mean, and after we finished the program and we were doing the maintenance part, that's when, we definitely saw things fall apart there, because it was just, even just getting clutter buddies. And again, I just want to say the program, Lee, thank you. There was one part where what helped me personally was Joey shared that even after all this time, that here's somebody was holding the torch when a decade before this was in vogue, saw this as an issue, and he still has to work that muscle of not having clutter. That made me feel it's okay. I attuned it to exercising. You're not going to run fast or work out fast and achieve your results. It takes, it's like if you're in for the long haul, you got to walk and keep walking. So moving forward, just anything that, I could see that, when I talk to people that still are interested in the group and are really motivated by it, and I see their rooms are still livable, they're practicing these, and that just makes me feel good, because the hard work that, I just see the struggles that we have, and this is a very, very real problem, because it affects on your end. I could see both sides of the coin. On your end, it affects the quality of life, a happier tenant, less vermin, a lot of issues. Just even in insurance costs, it's got to help. I've seen people with stuff to the ceiling, and it's scary. I mean, it's an issue, it's like this is like a very needed program. And I'm just like humbled that I was part of it. And thank you for asking me to share. It was a great experience. Thank you.
Because sometimes we tend to buy stuff that we don't need, and sometimes it's hard to let go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could say from our experience in going through the 3-day training and going through some of the BIT materials, a lot of the staff have kind of felt like that, that there might not be every single aspect of it, but there were definitely certain pieces of it, like the excessive acquiring or having trouble letting go of things that you feel emotionally attached to. Yeah, there were definitely like elements of that, I think.
But I can't speak, my partner has not this problem at all. She's always throwing out my stuff, so I really hear what you're saying, but I really don't think everyone has this, not even on the spectrum.
Probably 90% of the population.
How do you think we engage clients who aren't ready to contemplate anything about their hoarding? Do you think the materials would be helpful to do one-on-one during home visits, or do you think it's really best in a group setting?
We actually, that's actually something that we had a lot of, sorry, yeah. That's actually something that came up a lot. We have quite a few tenants that the group setting was not something that appealed to them, but they had a good relationship with their worker, and so we've given a bunch of staff the book, and they actually do go through it with their clients one-on-one. And I mean, they're not doing it in its entirety like we did in the group, but they are bringing stuff
To them to sort of begin to work on it individually. It's been useful.
I could share too. So, yeah, it's gonna be tough. I'll just speak up. So, basically, one of the things that we saw statistically, that folks doing the Buried in Treasures curriculum, that the outcomes were about 27% overall improvement when it was completed as a group. Whereas when it was done as bibliotherapy, which is people just using the book alone, it was about 9%. So you can see that due to many of the qualities of just being in a peer group, 3 times better outcomes. So yes, it's still effective when it's used by a person on their own. But when you talk about actually using the curriculum from the book and adapting it to one-on-one, I think it's an incredibly helpful tool. So we've seen a lot of success with that. But yeah, I mean, the group dynamic is definitely helpful. But a lot of folks, like you were saying, aren't necessarily interested in coming together. So we would definitely encourage you to be creative with that curriculum and get it to people however you can.
I'm glad you mentioned the lack of a staging area, because I had somebody move and I made the mistake. I didn't know how small this unit was, and the woman had stuff. I should have not let her move it, but I wasn't there at the time, so now she has all of this stuff, but there's no place to sort it. Is there any contemplation of providing some kind of staging area where someone could take 2 bags and look through them and that kind of thing? Has that been thought of?
we haven't.
Like breaking ground.
Yeah, I was gonna say breaking ground. No, yeah, no. I think actually that's a really good idea and a really good point. We in our group didn't get to a point where people were ready to start sorting out, but in general, when people are doing those things, they'll do it very. They'll open their door to their apartment and they'll do a bag and then they'll close the door to their apartment and do it like that. I mean, that's not probably ideal for their neighbors, but that's how it's been done in the past. That's a really good point, though, to have something like that. I didn't even think of.
Excuse me, just as being on the other side, I could, just if I could give a little insight. I got a note on my door recently saying, while you were out, this person whose name I wasn't familiar with inspected my place, and it was dangerous, and there was some sort of legalese and implication that I was going to be at least at best a lot of trouble or at worst eviction.
Is that a Section 8 HPG inspection?
No, this was just a building person who I didn't know, and I know a lot of people in the building. So anyway, I went to Joey, and Joey really, the problem was me sorting out winter boots and non-winter boots, so the door didn't fully open. Had he just, so the point I'm trying to bring is, like, by the way, today's like a good day for me. My synapses are working, and like I'm all right. There's other days when I read that letter, I was really depressed, to say the least. So I asked Joey for help. He looked at it, he said everything's fine. The only thing he saw was the door opened 90%. And then I get it. I get that reason. It's, you want movement. But the letter was like a form letter, for me it was like, well, what? Like, I have all these, everything, what's wrong? That's one suggestion. Again, like I said, I'm having a good day. I could suggest you have access to your tenants' phobias, their psychosocials. Last night, we have these sliding doors in certain bathrooms, and I know people in a lot of supportive housing, and they have some sort of door like that, or even through the radiators, you get these field mice that have no backbone, and they're very agile. Just seeing that run across the floor, because I had put so many traps down, and I had got rid of it, and I got rid of the problem painstakingly, and there's nothing to attract them. Just maybe because it was warm that they just kind of, or this one just, when I saw it, I was like, so anyway, the point is to your clients, you have the information that would communicate to them best. Some people in our group, there was one person who kept newspapers from, like, literally, it was like from a bad movie, like Brooke Astor, one of those people that had like newspapers back from the 50s, and he wouldn't let go of it. And no matter how many times this person just was so reluctant to have anyone come and touch a Daily Star from 1947, he had to read this one paragraph. I can identify with that because I have certain things that was important to me, that defined me. But paper then is a fire hazard, and having that much of it and how it was affecting his life. But just some people don't respond to, I'm just speaking it from this side of the thing of like having someone saying you got to do that. It is a big shock from living in a backpack and then having to take everything out and put back in to having a space that looks at first grand and perfect and well designed, and all of a sudden, look, we live in New York City, you can pay the most for something or the same thing the least for something, and you get that pair of sneakers, and all of a sudden that pair of sneakers and an infomercial and your place is cluttered. So, on that note though, and also, again, I was fortunate enough that my friendship with Joey, like our relationship, that I was told about it before the group started. My counselor she was informed about it at the next full CUCS meeting, so I was already in the group for like 2.5 weeks when she said, Walter, I have something really good for you, this course. And I was, and she's really helpful. It's nothing a slur on her. It's just she got the information late. So I think that now that we have that already, this like test group, that it could be promoted a lot better. And just, I think most people, even the sour grapes in our group, all in the beginning were very enthusiastic about coming in. So again, but when it got to the homework and the staging, it was frustrating because, you know, for me, it reminded me, well, I don't have a garage, and I missed, you know, building a hot rod with my father, and, you know, that kicked up all that can of worms of, you know, my daddy's not here, I don't have a car, you know, so all of that stuff. So, anyway, that would be, you have the tools to get.
See, and actually, I'm a director of a shelter. So my problem is that when people are going to move in, that's when I have to maybe be more careful to not send them with everything. Especially if they have a small place, but it's very difficult not to send them with everything. I have to take it all with me. And where it would be much better to leave some of it behind, because then it arrives and it creates issues. And there, quote, is no staging area, especially in the older SROs. I mean, in the newer New York 3 studios, there's more room, but in the smaller buildings, there isn't. And so that's an issue that I face as a shelter director, you know, moving people on.
Just as that, but I understand, I remember going back to the shelter I was at, and they assured me, and I was friendly with the person, he assured me my stuff would be there. It wasn't there when I returned. So, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of clients you have that had experienced that. So there's that fear of, well, which do you choose? And
So if I could just add on that, I'm sure those of you in the back couldn't hear this last comment, and it was really about a proactive approach. Before people move into their new housing, they're in the shelter, having a staging area to actually make some of those decisions and reduce what's coming in the first place. And it sounds like that's being echoed up here. So is there another question we can take from you?
Just two quick questions. One, I wanted to know if, when you have future groups, would you consider combining the residents, or would you still keep it separate?
We're two different buildings.
Right. But I'm saying, would you just keep it just for the building, or would you have outside?
We spoke about,
Yeah.
we did speak about that. We didn't think tenants would come if they had to move to do it.
In the past, we haven't had great luck with tenants going to other buildings for different types of groups.
And then the other question was, has this curriculum been done with, you know, when it's the hoarding is with animals?
So the question was about, has this been helpful for people who have animal safety issues? They have too many animals for the size of their home. And it's interesting because out of the many groups that we've run, people haven't been upfront with that situation. But when we look at the general attachments, the general motivations for acquiring and saving, what we're doing is helping people to generalize that. So no matter what it is that they're holding on to, why is that, and what are the pros and cons of it, and what are your intentions? Because we know that the vast majority of people that are doing what's commonly called animal hoarding are doing it to benefit the animals themselves, right? So they're trying to take care of them because they figure if I don't save them, then they might be put to sleep. So ultimately, if we're looking at, you know, supporting that, you know, value of helping those animals, how can we do that? So in terms of a partnership with maybe the ASPCA and saying, you know, what kinds of facilities are available, it's an equivalent to the staging area. How can we support the health and safety of those animals while we work with the individual that's collected them?
Have you thought about contacting APS to use this system? Because they go in like stormtroopers, actually. I had my client who moved to the 2 small rooms is now part of a case, and it's a very stormtrooper type mentality, and so I'm not sure what's going to happen, but they filed for eviction and all this kind of stuff.
So, yes, stormtrooper mentality is probably an accurate way to describe it. I think for APS, I I feel like someone did approach APS at one. Was it Mike? Did you say that? I think someone did approach APS at one point, but I don't think that they're in the business of trying to have a clinical intervention. I think that they're trying to get the apartment safe and livable at the moment because people are in eviction proceedings and they may not have this intervention, while very effective, it takes time. And I think that they're not really interested or even able to really spend the time, which is why we try to do it.
I've spoken directly to APS about, and they're very clear to say that they are not preventative services. They come in when the problem's already happened, and there seems like there's a major gap, like you're saying, there should be more, but they don't seem to be the ones to do it.
Have other questions?
So thank you. As I was listening to the CUCS speakers presenting, there were a couple of points I wanted to bring up. And one of them was this idea that by the time people come to the end of the Buried in Treasures course, they're ready to start. And we have a lot of encouragement in the facilitator guide saying, you as a facilitator might feel like you failed if people haven't, reached their goal of everything being done. And what we're saying is if we can come to the end of those 16 sessions and feel ready, we've succeeded. Now, what we've added now is the hope scale, right? So what we're measuring now is people's sort of enthusiasm for moving forward. How hopeful are you that things will get better? Because when they came in, maybe there was still that part saying, convince me. I want it, but I don't believe it. People believe it, I think, for the vast majority of folks by the time they're done. I know I did. Time and time again, I had that much more faith in my own recovery. So we want to capture that, and it's one of those qualitative variables it's hard to put down on paper on a scale of 1 to 10. How hopeful are you about your future? Like Walter was saying, what's the difference between a 7 and 8? Maybe not at all, totally, or nothing in between, but we're also looking at, you were talking about the savings cognition inventory, and one of the factors that's really being looked at now is perfectionism and the role that plays in recovery, and how even with the best intentions, something isn't started because it might not be completed perfectly. So taking a closer look at how perfectionism impacts this. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the statistic that you shared about the diagnosis of schizophrenia in this population, that's significantly higher than the general population that is affected by hoarding disorder. Now, this brings us to the screening process itself. And if you're going to be running these groups, you might be wondering, what questions are we asking people so that we make sure that the folks that are coming are a good match? Is this the group for them? Are they the person for the group? And conversation has gone back and forth over the years about, should people with like a psychotic disorder be ruled out? Should someone with a substance abuse use be ruled out? And I've often said, no. I mean, it's a case-by-case situation. And if someone is saying, even though I use this substance or even though I have that diagnosis, it's not going to get in the way of me getting a lot out of this group. And that really is the main thing. Am I ready for that group? Despite what I might be challenged by, do I have a way to deal with that? And in the past, I think a lot of groups were a really narrow sort of window of opportunity for people to attend because they were automatically sorted out by a diagnosis or by substance use categories and told, well, that person's not appropriate. But what we're saying is that we really need to have greater access to groups like this. And when folks say, I'm ready, let's be there. Let's be there to welcome them. So I think it's a really important step that we're taking in this journey together, that we're allowing more people to have access to something that they really want. So, and I just wanted to say thank you so much, Walter, for being here to represent. Really proud to bookend this panel up here with a peer. Thank you.
If I may please piggyback humbly on Lee, just on that. I mean, when we talk about steps and ready, I mean, it's all the I guess, granddaddy of them all is the 12-step big book of AA, and the message there is always keep the door open for someone. They may not be ready in the healing now, but at least if it's exposed to them, they may be ready. If they see somebody who's gets evicted, that might be a motivator for them. So people are different motivated at different parts of their lives. Sometimes they may need to hold on to something because they're in a relationship, but the next time around they may not be totally different, and they'll laugh at, why did I even have that? So just to piggyback, I think it should be open to anyone regardless.
How can we refer your clients
So we don't have, we run the groups on our site, so we don't have outside folks coming in, but there's a couple of different things you can do. Like Lee said, the facilitator's guide is available free online. The books are really affordable to get workbooks for the tenants. We really enjoyed having Lee and Beck and Randy come out and train us. So if you have the staff and the resources to do that, it's a great way to really do kind of a deep dive into the material. The CUCS training department has also developed kind of a quick overview of the BIT curriculum. So there's a hoarding training that goes through the diagnosis with a little snippet of the BIT curriculum, and then there's an additional training that gets a little deeper into that as an option. So if you go to the CUCS website, there's a training section, and you could sign up for emails.
Will you go to the agency in case we need to do training? Will you go to the agencies to do training about?
That's something, you could reach out to the training department to see if that's something that's available. And then when we had it with us, Lee and Beck and Randy came to us here. So I think both avenues could probably work. You're welcome. Okay. All right, so if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank everyone for coming and thank all the members of the panel today for presenting.